Hello, everybody. This is Joel Godi, and I'm the founder of Neurogifted. Today, I'm very happy to have this conversation about neurodiversity, the current understanding, and the way forward with Dr. Amanda Kirby, who is a renowned expert on the subject of neurodiversity. In her own words, she's unusual as she wears many hats as an ND campaigner, a medical doctor, an academic, a researcher, an entrepreneur, and most importantly, a parent and grandparent of neurodivergent family. She is also neurodivergent. She is an amazing person, and I am as excited as I know you are to hear what she has to say to us today. So with that, I welcome Amanda to the Neurodiversity India Summit.
Thank you very much for inviting me today. And, at the heart and soul of who I am as a parent and a grandparent. And the other bits are the bits that have got stuck on along the way, I think, probably.
Yes. So I don't know how familiar you are with the Indian story of neurodiversity. So we have, post-pandemic, we have seen a sudden increase in the workplaces, in education. Of course, there's a lot of work that's been happening over the last 20, 25 years, but the last 2-3 years has been very special in terms of awareness building for neurodiversity. So you've been there, you've done that, you've seen that. So 35, 40 years, I'm guessing, with neurodiversity. What do you have to say to a country who's just beginning to understand neurodiversity?
Well, I think for a country that's just starting to understand neurodiversity is learn the mistakes of other countries that have tried to understand neurodiversity before, because then that saves quite a lot of time. If I look back 37 years ago, my son was diagnosed with dyspraxia and ADHD and various things. 34, 35, he's 37 now. People thought you grew out of it, whatever it was. And we never thought about neurodiversity being a lifelong, different people, different ages, and things overlap. So I think you can move faster because you know more at this stage than we did 25, 30 years ago. And I think that's really important, that people, children, young people, don't fit into neat boxes, that we often set up systems by labels, but people try to squeeze into them. And when they don't fit one of those categories, they get nothing. So I think there's some really important lessons that we can learn from the research, from the practice, to say, don't do as we did, do what is understood today. And that can really save a lot of time. So you can construct great services, great provision from the get-go. So you can move faster because you're not having to unpick lots of things that didn't work.
Right. Yeah, that's true. But, what about culture? What about, traditional beliefs about neurodivergent conditions? I mean, how do you think, what was the experience in the UK, for example?
Yeah, so I think, the language, the culture, our belief systems vary from person to person, country to country, from family to family. And the language we use, the words we use, and how we perceive a child or young person or adult, we've changed some of the narrative, but that takes a while to catch up. So awareness is really, really important. So we have to bust some myths, because often some family members may be thinking about what we thought about disability, neurodiversity, special educational needs, disabled, handicapped. The words that we've used in the past will be the words in our families and our cultures that people will still be thinking about. Now, in order to have good conversations together, we need to know that what we knew wasn't always correct, and our framing is different today. So that's going to take a while, and that's why awareness in families and in local organizations, is certain in school is so important, because we won't talk about it overtly unless we feel safe to do so. And as a parent, I remember 30 years ago standing on the school gates with other parents and people going, well, why can't he do that? And why isn't he joining in to do that? And I remember as a doctor, I'm confident, but I was still a parent. And when people talk about not wanting to play with your child because they didn't understand your child, that's still really hurtful. So I think awareness and education is important, and having more people come and stand up and go, this is me as an adult, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what I can do, and having more stories. Stories are really powerful. I think they help people understand, and they pin it to your culture, they pin it to your organization, they pin it to your village. Is if you know people who are talking about this, it makes all the difference. So I think that's a big difference. And I think that the language around neurodiversity is great, because it isn't about, we're going to talk about autism, we're going to talk about ADHD, we're going to talk about people and how we can maximize the skills and talents of every person, right? So it allows a different narrative as well to be had.
Wonderful. So what has been your experience? So you just spoke about the early days of your son going to school, but so in 30 years, what's changed?
Oh, well, firstly, he's older and he's a father and he's got children. So, and I think, and I'm a grandmother of another child who's got neurodivergent children as well, right? So the first thing, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I've got lots of family members who are neurodivergent. And what I'm seeing is what's happening, what's it like in school today that it wasn't like 15, 20 years ago and wasn't like 30 years ago. And I think where you get help, and it's appropriate, what I see is children flourishing. Where I see you don't get help and people have a misunderstanding about that child, children wither on the vine. They don't do so well. They're seen as a nuisance. And I'll give a personal example. And I have to, because I'm a grandma, so I'm bound to say, a grandma tale in a sense. But my 8-year-old grandchild he's got ADHD and developmental language disorder. He's got various things, but he is brilliant at maths. He's brilliant at computing. He's getting help and support, and his schools see and value who he is and his contribution. But if he was someone else who didn't have that support, didn't have his parents, didn't have the support of getting the right diagnosis, the right help and support, a school that understands him, then he could be seen, if he was another child somewhere else with the same strengths and challenges, he could be seen as a nuisance, he could have been excluded from school, he could be seen as failing, and they may see him not as capable, but as incapable. And that just shows that where you're born, the opportunity you have, this is about adversity as much as it is about neurodiversity. And I think that's really important, that who gets help depends on what's available and if you can get access to it appropriately, and you can get sufficient help as well.
It's been in the news. I've been watching what's happening across Europe and in the US. I hear that we've had parliamentarians talk about neurodiversity in the UK Parliament. How did that happen? It doesn't seem to happen here.
Well, I think it's people like me that are mouthy, that shout loud, right? So I think the power of parents, we should not underestimate the power of parents, okay? And I think that one voice alone is quiet, but many voices together make a noise. And I think this is where the power of advocacy, where you can go. And if you're in Parliament, you need votes. And if you've got lots of parents who are talking about this, then that becomes something that's important. The other thing is that we want to optimize talent. We want to get people into work. There's talent shortages across the globe. We want to keep people in work. We want to keep well-being. So if you talk to parliamentarians about money, that usually turns their heads as well. Okay, so that's really important. That why would we lose 20% of the talent we've got? Why do we, and I do a lot of work in prisons, in the justice system, where we have at least 1 in 3 people in prison who are neurodivergent, but they've got adversity. Why are they? It's not because ADHD and autism makes you more likely to commit crime. No, that's a really important statement. It's actually that you haven't had the opportunity to get the help and support. And so you end up in the wrong place, right? So, and if we see what we spend in education, what we spend in employment, what we spend in justice, that actually understanding neurodiversity saves money. People contribute to society, not a burden to society. They contribute. They spend money. So why wouldn't you want people to spend money in your ecosystem as well. So I think that when you talk about that, talent optimization, talent retention, not losing people who are capable of contributing, then I think that helps. But I think one parent at a time, we can make a lot of noise when we get together as well.
And what about the costs involved, Amanda? The costs are really prohibitive. In fact, across the world.
Well, I think a solution which is the same solution as everywhere else in a way, actually, because I think what we have at the moment is a funnel system that says you can only get help if you get a ticket, right? So you only get help if you get a diagnosis. And that approach is never going to work, okay? And we've seen it in the UK as well as in other countries as well. I was talking to a group in one area of the UK this morning that have got a 5-year waiting list, right, to get a diagnosis, right? So that's not a service when it's operating like that. So if we raise awareness, we're going to raise expectation and we're going to raise demand, and we can't deliver it. So we have to have a triage approach, right? Now, if the only way I can get help and support is to get a diagnosis, and I'm on a long waiting list, the reality is nothing is nothing, right? So no help is nothing. So we can do better than that from the get-go, all right? So if somebody has got challenges, say, with sleep, why not give practical help to help with sleep? If a child's got difficulties using a knife and fork, then give some practical strategies that cost nothing, how to use a knife and fork. So we know that amongst neurodivergent children, there are a series of elements that seem to be problematic for them, that we can provide practical strategies from day one, right? We launched Children's Profiler a couple of weeks ago, which actually allows you to say, okay, for this child, here's some practical strategies depending on their need, not their label, right? So once you start using, directing, not overloading people with information, but saying, what are your needs? What are your needs? What are your needs? And directing practical strategies for children, you can then do it for 1 million, 2 million, 5 million at very low cost. And what you're doing is reducing the waiting list, the load, because people don't need a diagnosis then. People are waiting for the diagnosis because they're thinking, when I get that, I'm going to get the help. But actually what they do is when they get the diagnosis, they get the ticket to get the help. But it doesn't mean you're going to get the help. So let's give the help first. And then it means those who are more complex, that need greater support, the professionals that we've got in short supply everywhere can really focus on those who are the most complex needs. And those that we need to reach all of these people upstream, we can get help to them. So we're getting help to many, many more people from the word go. And that's important for children and adults. And I think that's the only approach really that's going to be work to reach the numbers that we have to reach globally, really. Otherwise, it's going to be those who can pay get, and those who can't pay don't get anything.
Amanda, what about all the information being dispensed around the world? There's so much misinformation included in that. In the last year itself, we've seen tens of neurodiversity-centered events around the globe, and that's confusing a lot of people because of the mixed messaging that is taking place in these conferences. So how does one filter out what's genuine and what's not?
I'm a doctor, I'm an academic, I'm a researcher, I'm a clinician, and I think it's really important that we take an evidence base. And what happens is people start to get interested in neurodiversity, and then we start seeing, I don't know if you know the phrase snake oil being sold. So, you know, it becomes a bit of a feeding frenzy. So people think, oh, this is good, we can make lots of money out of this. Buy this, it'll cure you, right? And I think where you've got parents who are vulnerable parents, who I remember when I ran a clinical service for 25 years, and parents would come to see me and they would have tried some cure-all program, right, that had been sold to them. Do this, press your button, press your child's nose 5 times, jump up in the air and they'll be cured, right? Now, as a parent, you know, we all want the best for our children. I don't know a parent really who doesn't want the best for their kids. And sometimes when somebody offers it, and usually in the mix of this is sort of psychobabble. So they usually say neuro something in it. and it's, if you do this, it's going to cross this, and the wires are going to be rewiring, and it sounds very plausible. And if you're worried and you can't get anything, then you think, well, do you know what? I'll save up my money, I'll remortgage my house, and this is it. So the first thing is, I think, as a parent, is to really check out when people say cure, walk away fast in the other direction, fast, okay? Because there isn't a simple cure for that, because we'd found it. We would have found it by now, right? And people are complex.
Right.
People are complex. And who you are and where you live, what you eat, there's lots of other things that go on. Neurodiversity isn't in isolation. So I think it's important that when you're finding out and you're going to places, is to use an evidence base if you can, is to research and to find people and get to know who is credible, right? Because I think there are lots of people that are popping up and going, oh, I've been on a course of 5 minutes and now I'm an expert, right? So really be cautious about that. And if anybody says cure, just walk away, right? Fast, right? If it sounds too good, it is too good, right? I think that's the bit, right? So I think that's important, is to be cynical and check out and ask other people and find out. But there will always be people popping up with something which seems amazing, right? And there has been all the way through for the last 30 years I've been working in this. There's been global companies that have set up something, and they've shown that if you jump up and down for 5 minutes every day, then your child is cured. There's always been something around, but none of them have been proven to be effective, because we're complex. We've got 84 billion brain cells connected in different ways. Why would there be one program that's going to cure whatever it is? It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
So with all your experience, in the last 3-4 decades, and where we are considering where we are today, the kind of improvements we've seen in technology space in terms of research, where do you see support systems for neurodivergent individuals in the next 10-20 years, particularly like India, where we don't have the government involved anywhere?
So I think there's a couple of things. One is around if getting systems in place, we need to make sure there's a common language. As a researcher, we need to understand that we're measuring the same things. We're measuring apples and apples. So getting a common language across the piece about what is neurodiversity, what does that mean in health, education, employment, different services, voluntary sector, that's really important, because I need to measure the same thing to know whether something's working or something's not. Because at the moment we have really different language being used and described. So in some places when we talk about neurodiversity, we're talking about autism. In some places we're talking about ADHD, or we're not talking about ADHD. What are we talking about? So we need to have a consistent definition so we can talk across the piece and collect the same data. I think what is going to happen with technology, it's going to mean that we can do it today, but we can do it today. We can do personalization. And I think that's going to be personalized healthcare, personalized education. We've got the ability to do flipped classrooms where children can access education and information from wherever, you don't need a book. You can go and find out all about trains across the world by going online. You don't need to have your book in front of you, trains from 1932, right? We can do so live information, we can seek out, we can be up to date. So I think where we're going in health, we can go across in neurodiversity as well, and in education, much more personalization, using things like gamification. So you work your way through, you find out what you need, and as life changes, you can reassess where you are. And I think that technology allows us, if you have a smartphone, we can deliver this. If you have a booth where you can go, it can be done, right? So this isn't something that has to be wildly expensive in a way. 20 years ago, it'd be lovely if we had something like, like a computer, and we go, it'd be lovely if people could afford a computer. Well, people walk around with smartphones, or they can access this in a way that we could never have seen. We're having this conversation today. 5 years ago, we wouldn't have been having this conversation, right? So the speed of access to digital opportunities, whether people can't afford a smartphone, but they can go to somewhere in a village to access that information, I think enables us to do things that we couldn't possibly do 5-10 years ago. All right. And I think that the price of that is going down. more and more, and more and more people have access to technology in different ways. That allows personalization. Big data will drive us to be able to go, I measure what you're doing, I can see who you are, I can see where you live. Down the road, you go and talk to Mr. So-and-so and they can help and support you. But also the person in your village, did you know you've got another parent in the village who's had similar experiences to you? I'm sure they can help you with cutlery or getting dressed and undressed because they've been through that 3 years ago. So in a way, using data in a very different way to connect communities effectively means we put less burden on services and we work and support each other. And if you see that, we've seen that with technology to get us from A to B, right? To directing us, yeah. So it's the same technology in a sense, but we're talking about people getting from A to B rather than cars.
Wonderful. That's something to look out for. Now I'm just coming to your work, right? You've written some books, and I know about your latest book, especially about neurodiversity at work with your Smith. It's a remarkable book. I've read parts of it. I admit I have not read the entire book, but I know it's very relevant to my profession. It's very relevant to my profession, and that's the space that Neurogifted works. So I want to know from you, what's changed in terms of organizations?
So I think what's changed over the years, and I've got my 10th book coming out next year as well on neurodiversity and education. And I suppose if I look back to when I first wrote my books, one of my first books was around dyspraxia or developmental coordination disorder, and I called it The Hidden Handicap. Now I would never use that language today, all right? So that's the first thing. So language has changed. When I wrote later books, I wrote books called specific learning difficulties. We wouldn't use that phrase either, because people are specific, not the difficulties are specific. They're specific to the person. So I think language has changed, and I think where we are, and will change, but where we are today, neurodiversity opens up this opportunity to say, we think, move, process, act, communicate differently. Let's talk about you, not the label, but the person, right? And it allows us to have more personalized conversations. So I think one of the things that's changed, if I look back 30 years ago, people thought that you would grow out of it, so we thought these were children's things, that you would have your birthday card and then they'd be gone, instantly in a puff of smoke. Well, we know that's not true. So we're recognizing, like diabetes, for instance, that neurodivergent traits and conditions can affect your brain, your body, your well-being, that we're not just disconnected from our brains and our bodies. And we're thinking about neurodiversity and mental health as well. So same brain. So we're thinking about, how do we think about us as a whole in the context of our lives where we live? So it could be where you're living in Delhi or you're living in Hyderabad. What's the difference between access to services, access to knowledge, if you're living in the country or you're living in a town? So we're starting to think about the environment that somebody's in has an impact on your outcomes as much as you and how you're born. So your genes and your environment interact with each other as well. And I think the wonderful thing is that we would have thought you're born with it, that's it. But actually that's not true, because we know that our environment has an impact on our genes as well as our genes having an impact on our environment. And that's something that we recognize much, much more now. What we eat, where we live, there's a load of other things going on, and that our brains continually change. Now, if we know that, there's a real opportunity for improvement at all stages of life. And I think that's very optimistic. And also, I think we're thinking about, when I think about my child today, I need to be thinking about the man tomorrow, and we're thinking about the woman tomorrow, is that we're thinking about a lifelong approach to supporting individuals. That means it's important to think about major transitions in life and be prepared. Why do we become so surprised that it's going to be New Year or it's going to be Christmas when we know the date it's going to happen? But every year we seem to be very surprised about it happening. Well, the same goes for transitions in school or transitions into work. And I think we're learning that we need to be much more prepared early on for those transitions, rather than them wait and then bump us in the face and go, oh, we've got to do something now.
And Amanda, please tell us about the profilers that you've been developing.
So I ran a clinical service, as I said, for 25, 30 years, and I was seeing children and adults who were coming to see me, and we had a team of people. And I just thought, I'm not going to help lots of people. I'm helping some. Really, I was pleased with what I was doing or what we were doing as a team, but I wasn't going to reach lots more people. And what I recognized from the evidence as well is that these conditions like ADHD and autism and dyslexia and dyspraxia and dyscalculia and developmental language disorder often commonly overlap. So each person's going to have different strengths and challenges. Every person's going to be a little bit different. So if I want to help lots of people, then I need to use technology to be able to work out what you need, what somebody else needs, and I need to do it in the context of your life, like we were just saying. Okay, so over the last 10 years, seems like longer, because it seems like we've built a system from scratch. We've tested, and we've used it with hundreds of thousands of people, and we have a number of different profiling tools. So if I think about the children's profiler, which just relaunched our latest version last week before last. So this looks at 7 cognitive areas. It gathers the background history. It is translatable. So we've got a translation bar, so you can access it in different languages. It provides practical support, gives you a profile of your child's strengths and challenges. It goes from 7 to 16 years of age. The parent completes it. They put in the background information about the child as well. So if you want to go to see a professional, you can take that report, because I remember being a parent having to tell my child's story again and again and again and again. It'd be useful to have had it all collated in one place. It also provides practical strategies for both strengths and challenges straight away. And I think it celebrates the strengths. That's where we probably in the early days, we're too much thinking about all the stuff that kids couldn't do. We're now thinking about, okay, recognize the challenges and provide practical strategies, but also celebrate the strengths so you can maximize that. So it says how to do that, and then has a suite of resources as well. So more help if you want more help, okay? So the children's profiler is like that, but the workplace profiler we have for people going into the workplace, in the workplace, it includes things like mental well-being tools as well, employability tools as well, and again, helps practically that person or the employer or the organization to help. We're also working in the justice setting. So we are going to be in about 35 prisons next year in the UK. I've got my research hat as well. So I really want to, what do we learn from that? So we take the data and we think about, what are we learning? What can we take back to education? What can we take back to try to prevent people getting into the prison system as well? So we publish data on that. So we have a justice version as well. And then we've got a university one, we've got an apprenticeship one, and each of these will have different tools in the box that are relevant. So somebody's in college or university or school, we might need study skills in the box because they're studying. Somebody who's not studying doesn't need the study skills bit. So it's very person-centered. So, and we work in many, many areas, and we work in healthcare as well, trying to help the clinicians gather information, pull it together, but while somebody's waiting, provide them with practical guidance. So when they see the clinician, it's all there on the dashboard. So it saves them hours collating all of this information, and then they can track and follow and support that individual as well. So we're using the tools in lots of different ways, and it's exciting, and I'm never happy, and I always want it to be better.
That's really exciting. It's nice to hear about the profilers, Amanda. Maybe we'll see them in India someday soon. Tell us a little bit more about profilers for schools.
So we have a schools version of Profiler where it gathers the information at different ages and stages to try to help the teacher, support the teacher to know how to best support the pupils, okay? And I always think the problem teachers have is, one, we need to provide training as well, right? So I think that's really important. So a lot of the time I deliver training, because unless you have awareness that people don't fall in neat boxes, and 2 people with autism will be 2 different people with autism, people sometimes think about things in a rather, this is what we've got to do for these people, right? So actually getting teachers to understand that practical functional guidance, which is child-centered, everybody can do. And often we know great teachers who will go in the cupboard and they'll find a pen and they'll turn it round, or they'll find a pencil and they'll put a bit of tape around it. Do you know what I mean? To make it work for that kid. So we've all seen great teachers who will adapt things to work for that child, for them to engage them and be their best. So actually, even in countries that don't have massive funds, and I think I always go, you can do a lot with a box, with a cardboard box, A child's got imagination. You can do a lot with a pencil and paper. We can do a lot with very little to help children do better, be better, So I think that a lot of the strategies are no cost, low cost. We just need to make sure we get training out there, and we need to show people you don't need to be an expert. I think that's the other thing, is that when we think of autism is way out there, I'm never going to get that diagnosis, or ADHD is never out there, it becomes unobtainable. And teachers think, well, I can't do anything until I know what it is. But actually, they've still got the same child today and the day after and the day before, with and without a diagnosis. So understanding that actually, as a teacher, I need to ensure that my pupils can understand what I'm saying. And that's my responsibility as well as the child. So if I speak too fast, that might be difficult for the child. If the child can't see, then I need to show them something in a different way. If I'm teaching them something, that not every child will learn at the same rate. So recognizing that not every child can sit still at the same pace. So recognizing that the children in the classroom are like the adults around us. We are like that. Some of us need sound, some of us need silence. And recognizing that really helps us to go, how do we encourage every child to be as successful? It's we rather than your fault or your problem. It's about how do we get the best? And that's working with schools, but it's also working with the communities. I actually think, the best advocate is a parent, and the most motivated, practitioner is a parent. So we need to utilize parents effectively, because they're a hugely motivating force as well. And when we do that, we can, and work with the schools, we can really get the best out of our ecosystem as well.
Wonderful. There's so much to learn from you, Amanda. I know that we can go on, and given a chance, away from the spotlight, I know that I can talk to you for days if possible. But I hope that you'll come back, talk to us. Maybe you'll visit India someday, and we'll learn something from you.
Yeah, I love
Thank
India.
you so much, Sean. Yeah, and on behalf of the Neurodiversity India Summit and the organizer Usha Rangaraju, and also my team, NeuroGifted, I really thank you for taking your time out, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you.